Good afternoon slash evening, everybody. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you to everybody here at the Danbury Library, to the Friends Group, and everybody who helped to get this program going and who is actually attending out there at home. Um, my name is Paul Schiller, and I am a seasonal park supervisor of public education at Gillette Castle State Park. So that means that I get to show people around what I like to refer to lovingly as my castle, talk about its history, pointing out all of the quirks and eccentricities, and telling stories about William Gillette, some of which could actually be true. I also manage the castle archives. I research Gillette, work on educational programming at the park. And actually, for those at home that can't see my awesome water bottle, anyone that's a fan of The Office has Jim on it, says, if I left, what would I do with all this useless information in my head? I hope I never have to find out, and you'll find out just how much useless information is in fact in my head, so buckle up. So I'm going to go through and basically give you as much information as I can in a very short amount of time. Some of it may be verified by historical records. Some of it may be completely made up, but don't worry, you won't tell the difference. So let's start off by talking about William Gillette. And this guy that's in my picture, which hopefully you guys can all see through the magic of Zoom. Yeah, that guy in the picture is not William Gillette. So one of the common questions I get asked when people first come to visit the castle is if William Gillette had anything to do with the razor blade company. The short answer is no. The long answer, because that's what I give. The Gillette company was actually founded by this guy. His name was King Gillette, which first of all, I think is hilarious because King did the razors, but Will had the castle. Get it? King, castle. Okay. He was a very distant cousin of Will, but they had no contact with each other that I'm aware of. The only documented remarks that I've ever seen Will made about King Gillette was in regards actually just to the misspelling of their last name. He once wrote to a friend, what you want to do, if you don't mind a little advice, is to get some damned inventor to associate your name with a razor. I had a lot of trouble with the final E until Gillette came along with his face lacerator, at which point all is well. And then that actually brings us to that guy right there. So that handsome rascal is the reason why I'm standing here before you today. And that is William H. Gillette. So as far as what made him so special, I mean, in a nutshell, he was an actor, director, playwright. He basically did everything in the theater, and he was really, really good at it. You can think of William Gillette as the George Clooney of the late 1800s. So if you were a living, breathing person anywhere in the Western world at the turn of the century, you knew his name. So of course, like all good stories, we have to start from the very beginning. So, okay, so William Gillette was born in Hartford on July 24th, 1853. Now, his father, Francis, the guy in that top left photo, got a nice beard. I admire that. He was a Yale-educated lawyer. He was a farmer, a businessman. He held several positions in local government, almost became governor of Connecticut. And actually, shortly after Will's birth, he was appointed to a 2-year fill-in term in the U.S. Senate. Now, William Gillette's mother, Elizabeth, who's on the top right there, she was part of the Hooker family. Her full name was Elizabeth Daggett Hooker. So for those of you who need a quick refresher on Connecticut history, the Reverend Thomas Hooker founded the settlement, the English settlement in Hartford in 1636, and he's widely considered to be the father of Connecticut. And in 1639, he helped to draft the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the first constitution, setting up a government in the colonies. And that document is the reason we are referred to as a constitution state. So if you look at both his mother's side and his father's side, you can see that William Gillette was essentially, well, I mean, from his mom's side, he was from the founding family of Connecticut, but both sides had pretty deep roots in the area, well over 200 years before he was even born. Now, before we go any further, we'll break down the siblings real quick. He was actually the youngest of 6 children, but for the most part, Will was actually, he essentially grew up as an only child. So one sister, Mary, died as a toddler, so he never knew her, as was all too common back then. He had another brother, Frank, who went out west during the gold rush. He contracted TB. He died out there in his early 20s. Then, if you look the bottom center photo, that is Robert Gillette. So, Rob served for the Union during the Civil War. First, he was in the Army. He went to Antietam, and then after that, he actually got sick so badly that he actually had to resign his commission. He went home, he recovered, and then he later joined the Navy. He was the assistant paymaster on the USS Gettysburg after the Battle of Fort Fisher, which his ship participated in. The Union won the battle, so they went to go survey the fort. And a drunk sailor thought it would be a good idea to walk through the powder magazine with a lit torch. So that explosion killed 130 people, including Robert Gillette. So that brings us to two siblings. The one on the bottom left would be Edward. So Edward went out to Iowa. He ran a newspaper out there, and he also was a U.S. congressman for a little while. And then in the bottom right, we have Elizabeth, or Lily. She actually married one of their neighbors up in Hartford, George Warner, who was the brother of Charles Dudley Warner, a very well-known author and editor and public figure altogether. And Lily actually became pretty successful in her own right as an illustrator and a poet. So that's just the basic breakdown on the family. Oh, not there yet. Okay, so originally the Gillette family lived in Bloomfield. So at that time, so we're talking the 1830s, it actually wasn't known as Bloomfield. It was called Wintonbury, which was a combination of Windsor, Farmington, Simsbury. And the old story is that one spring day, Francis Gillette looked out his window and saw the beauty of the fields in bloom, and he decided to lobby for that name change. The house that you see a very old picture of here actually still stands. It's on the National Historic Registry. Francis Gillette was an ardent abolitionist, and his house in Bloomfield was actually a stop on the Underground Railroad. Although that house was moved down the road because Cigna needed to make room for their campus, but it actually still does exist. Now, in 1853, Francis Gillette and his brother-in-law, John Hooker, bought 140 acres of land in the Asylum Hill area of Hartford, selling to all their friends who wanted to settle down there. It became known as the Nook Farm neighborhood because that's the area where the Park River sort of curves a little bit and then creates a nook for it. Now, the neighborhood itself became essentially the intellectual powerhouse of the city and of the country at that point. A lot of major historical, cultural figures lived in that neighborhood. Now, the Gillette House was finished in 1857, and all things considered, William Gillette actually had a pretty normal upbringing. Among his many interests was performing. He built a puppet stage at the age of 13, and he actually used to put on shows in his parents' carriage house. Now, you fast forward 1871, this guy, Mark Twain, Sam Clemens, he bought land from Francis Gillette, rented a room in John Hooker's house from 1871 until his house was completed in 1874. So during that time, William Gillette was in his like late teens, early 20s. So he would have actually been finishing up high school at that point. But the way that the neighborhood was designed is that everybody knew each other, but also everybody was fairly close. William Gillette lived about a block away from Mark Twain. Everybody had walkways leading to everybody else's house, so it was very easy to socialize. And he and Mark Twain actually became good friends. Now, William Gillette's first professional role on stage was a play called The Gilded Age. It was based on the book that Mark Twain wrote. Twain was actually the one that recommended him for the part. Now, the thing is, he actually meant it as a joke. He never really took William to be a serious actor. But he was later quoted as saying, "I don't know which I like better, having Gillette make a tremendous success or seeing one of my jokes go wrong." So joke's on you, Mark Twain. Okay, so Oh, back to Will. So while acting was not exactly a dignified profession, Gillette did have support from his parents. At that time, the stage was not really looked upon as a worthy um, endeavor. There's a very puritanical view of the theater where people who were actors were seen as sort of beneath other people, especially those from the ilk that Gillette came from. But he and a few other actors were sort of from high society. Here you have a you know, traditional born and bred New English gentleman, um, and he was one of the people that helped to raise the opinion of theater as a career choice. There's a lot of stories that his parents were not supportive of him, but they couldn't actually be further from the truth. Would his dad have preferred that he went into something like, you know, law, politics, anything like that? Absolutely. But at the same time, it's not like they discouraged the acting. In fact, before William Gillette did the Gilded Age, he was doing apprenticeships in the theater where he was making literally no money. So his father provided him a an allowance to live off of until he could start making it on his own. And the general story that we tell is that when when Will was first going to the train station to embark on his theater career, his father's the one who actually brought him to the train station and said something along the lines of, "I've brought two sons to this station only for them to leave and never return. I trust that you'll be the exception." And obviously he was. So he got started, like I said, with the Gilded Age, did a lot of stock acting. He traveled across the Midwest, the Northeast, the Gulf Coast. Um, his first major success came in 1881 with a play called The Professor. It was a play that he wrote and directed and starred in. Again, friendship with Mark Twain, big help because of the fact that that guy gave William Gillette $3,000 to help put on the show. So he was a very, very big supporter of Gillette's, and he also helped him a little bit later on when he was dealing with some not so clean managers and helping him get out of a sticky situation there. So Sam Clemens, definitely a good friend to have. So after that, Gillette the next year did a play called Esmeralda, which was an adapted play that he wrote, but he did not act in, although it was very well received. And then his next big hit was a play called The Private Secretary. Over the course of the next 15 years, he wrote and starred in another 11 plays, reaching international success. William Gillette was widely considered to be the dean of the American theater. Now, part of that goes to innovation. He had 5 patents. One of them was for a technique of making a galloping sound for theater effects, and he was always thinking of different things to enhance the experience in the theater. In fact, William Gillette actually popularized something that we take for granted today, and that is the technique of lights fading out and in between scenes. He also moved the theater away from a melodramatic style of acting to something that was more of a realistic form. So he decided not to go with over exaggerated acting. He was very subtle, but also the subjects he was portraying in his plays were subjects that people actually cared about, that they were involved in, that they were interested in. So that helped to sort of keep their interest. He also became extremely well known starting in 1886 for a play called Held by the Enemy. It was a Civil War spy drama, and it won international acclaim along with another play that he did, Secret Service, which he did in 1895. Again, another Civil War drama. Both sides were portrayed in a human and fair light, and that was huge because of the fact that William Gillette is doing these shows in the 1880s and 1890s. So you're talking about 20, 30 years after the end of the Civil War. So he made sure that they were both shows that audiences around the country would be willing to see and would receive favorably, rather than only sticking to, let's say, the northern side point of view. In fact, Secret Service became William Gillette's most successful production. It was his most popular show. He actually performed There we go. He actually performed Secret Service 1,700 times over the course of his career, which is more than he did any other show. Now, a little known tidbit of information is that in 1977, there was a stage version of William Gillette's Secret Service that was performed on stage, but it was televised. And it actually marked the dramatic screen debut for a then completely unknown actress. You can see her right there. Her name was Meryl Streep. So Gillette was a popular actor who excelled in drama and comedy. His acting style was pretty limited, though. So he was the kind of guy that was the strong, silent type who was silent in the face of danger. So people would compare him now towards like Clint Eastwood or a John Wayne type. But that being said, he knew that. He wasn't oblivious. He wasn't delusional. He knew what his strengths and weaknesses were. So because of that, he could write plays with leads that mirrored his strengths. So his ability to know what types of characters he could perform helped him to write more popular plays for himself. His style was very subtle compared to his contemporaries. He was able to capture an audience with a stare or a simple gesture. And he was also financially successful because he realized that by acting, directing, and writing the plays, all of the money came back to him. He was among the highest paid actors in the world. At his peak, William Gillette was taking home between $200,000 and $300,000 a year. And over the course of his career, he took home somewhere between $3 and $4 million total. So, as I like to say, he did okay for himself. Now let's get to talking about the only, not there yet. The only character that people actually care about. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. So let's talk about him. Now, of course, it was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who wrote the novels. In the need of money for his new estate, Doyle tried to write a play adaptation of his books. He made a couple attempts at recruiting some British actors for it, but he didn't really find much luck. They either refused outright or were wanting to make too many changes or made other demands that he thought were unreasonable. So eventually he ended up reaching out to a producer named Charles Frohman, who was William Gillette's manager at the time. Frohman had worked with Gillette on several occasions and in fact recommended that he do the role. Now Gillette accepted as long as he could rewrite the play, which Doyle was actually okay with, believe it or not. He asked what kind of latitudes he had with the script and whether or not he could marry Sherlock Holmes off, and basically Doyle's response was, you may marry him, murder him, or do what you will with him. Really, Doyle just got tired of the character. He wanted people to take his other works more seriously. He just didn't care. He just really wanted money. So Gillette took pieces of 4 of the stories and then added in his own characters, his own plot lines. Now, in the spring of 1899, Gillette actually traveled to England to meet Doyle. Now, the legend is he gets off the train. Doyle's there to meet him. He walks up to Doyle with a magnifying glass, says something along the lines of, unquestionably an author. And then that sort of got a chuckle, broke the ice, got the approval, and they were able to go from there. Whether or not the story is actually true, I mean, we know at least he did go to visit Doyle, and while he may not have been in full costume, I'm sure given his personality, he probably did make some kind of comment similar to that. So Gillette debuted as Sherlock Holmes in 1899. October 30th was his first performance at the Star Theater in Buffalo. And then he went on to perform that role over 1,300 times over the course of 33 years. Now, more importantly than that, he actually gave us the portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, and he popularized it. So things like the deerstalker cap, that was never actually written into the novels. The illustrator, Sidney Paget, had hinted at it just by drawing it into some of the stories. But William Gillette is really the one that incorporated that into the character and made it popular. Originally, Sherlock Holmes had a straight pipe. The problem with that is that it's not very easy to hold when you're on stage. So Gillette did the curved pipe just so that he'd be able to hold it while he's reciting lines to an audience. And then with the original novels, Sherlock Holmes used a pocket lens to find all his clues, which may have worked well for him. But in real life, when you're in the back of an audience, you can't see a pocket lens on stage. So William Gillette decided to make it bigger by using a magnifying glass, all of which are still associated with the character today. The phrase "elementary, my dear Watson" is probably one of the most popular phrases in our culture today. That was never actually in the novels. The word elementary was, as was the phrase "my dear Watson," but they were way far apart. William Gillette started using a phrase "elementary, my dear fellow," and then over time that evolved. So when they started doing Sherlock Holmes in the movies, that's where they started using the phrase "elementary, my dear Watson" based off of Gillette's phrase. So he gave us really what we think of when we think of that character. And so he gave us a classic profile, the portrayal of Sherlock Holmes. And when you're talking about advertisements back at the turn of the century, a lot of it's posters, pamphlets, brochures, things like that. And they were all using William Gillette's likeness, whether it was his silhouette, an illustration of him. His face was the one associated with Sherlock Holmes. So you can see that over here, that photo on the left is an advertisement for Sherlock Holmes. And then we have his silhouette, which is actually on a sign that we have hanging up at the park. So he really became the personification of Sherlock Holmes. In fact, Orson Welles once said, "It's too little to say that William Gillette resembles Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes looks exactly like William Gillette." Now, Gillette's career was predominantly on stage. He did a radio play in 1930, and the only film he ever actually did was a silent film version of his Sherlock Holmes play. So he took the script that he wrote for the Sherlock Holmes play and he turned it into a 2-hour silent movie. You can see the picture on the right is some graphics for that. So we'll get back to that a little bit later on. So I gave you some background on his career. So let's change gears for a second, talk about personal life. So during a performance of The Professor, William Gillette had seen a young actress named Helen Nichols in the audience. And as they say, it was love at first sight. Now, they immediately began courting and then they were married in the summer of 1882. She was an actress as well, not nearly of the amount of fame as Will was, and she actually gave up her career in the theater so that she could travel with him. Sadly, in 1888, so 6 years into their marriage, she actually died from a ruptured appendix at the age of 28. Now, the legend is that when she was on her deathbed, he promised her he'd never remarry. Is the story true? Sounds nice. Either way, he outlived her by 49 years. He was single the entire time. He never had kids. So he did keep that promise, whether or not it actually did happen. Now, after Helen's death, he took a 5-year break from his acting career. Originally, he made his way to Tryon, North Carolina, just sort of by accident. And not by accident, and he ended up buying up about 665 acres of land and building a 2-room cabin that he called Thousand Pines. This would be his private retreat until he sold it in the 1920s. Now, there's a story that while he was walking around the hills of Tryon, he suddenly collapsed. He was found by an old mountain woman named Mary Polly Carruth, otherwise known as Aunt Polly, who nursed him back to health. Again, it's a nice legend, sounds nice, but we don't know for sure if it's true. We do know that she was a real person and that they would have been friends, but whether or not she nursed him back to health after a sudden incident, we don't know. But again, sounds nice. Now, aside from his family's house in Hartford and Thousand Pines, William Gillette preferred large, slow-moving houseboats. So the first of which was called the Holy Terror. The second of which you can see here, this is called the Aunt Polly, after you know who. It was commissioned in 1898, built in 1899 in South Brooklyn by F.W. Ofelt and Sons. Originally a 104-foot yacht, made its maiden voyage in 1900 by sailing through the Long Island Sound and up the Connecticut River, 2 bodies of water that it would become very, very familiar with over the next couple decades. It was powered by a 3-cylinder triple expansion steam engine, once compared to a sewing machine motor, and it reached a top speed of 10 knots. In 1902, Gillette had the Aunt Polly lengthened by a whole 40 feet. So at the end of the day, it ended up being a 144-foot houseboat. So if you look, you can see in the top left corner, that photo would have been from either 1900 or 1901. And then if you look the bottom right corner, you can see the Aunt Polly after it was already expanded. And then you can also see some nice, lovely photos of the interior. It really did have all the comforts of home, and it was a primary residence, especially in the summer, for William Gillette um, for the first 2 decades of the 20th century. It was based out of Greenport, Long Island, and Gillette's frequent cruises up the Connecticut River are perhaps what led him to eventually settle down over there. Now, eventually, the Aunt Polly fell into disrepair. By 1922, Gillette had it permanently moored in a cement base. And then on December 20th, 1932, the Aunt Polly actually caught fire. It burned down at its mooring. Now, rumors were circulating around town that Gillette had actually set fire to it himself for obviously insurance reasons. But he addressed those rumors with a letter to the editor a couple months later saying, I will take this opportunity to say that the report that I set fire to the yacht myself in order to get the insurance on her is trifle incorrect, owing to the fact that there was no insurance. I did not think of it at the time. Now, the site was actually surveyed in 2003 by the Friends of the Office of State Archaeology, by the state archaeologists, Mystic Seaport, and a few other entities, and actually has been designated a state archaeological preserve. Many of the pieces from the Aunt Polly were actually taken out of it long before it burned, so you can actually see some of them on display. In the castle, we have an entire room on the second floor referred to appropriately as the Aunt Polly room. And then if you actually go down by the river, you can see that when the tide is low enough, you can see the wreckage of the boat down there by the water, on the water. So you can see the keel, you can see valves, tanks, parts of the mooring, etc. So it just depends on how low the tide is. Yeah, I caught those photos on a really good day. Now, William Gillette had actually planned to build his retirement home in Long Island. He had actually purchased a bunch of land in East Marion, New York, and he had starting amassing materials there. For whatever reason, he decided against that. Now, the story is that in the summer of 1913, Gillette sailed up the Connecticut River on the Aunt Polly and spotted a chain of hills known locally as the Seven Sisters. You take a look, you can see them right there. So where the castle is would be the just where the photo cuts off to the right, but it was just something that it was called just by riverboat captains naming them, so they had a landmark to help navigate the river. So he was intrigued by the area. He docked next to the Chester Headline Ferry, and he hiked the 200 feet up to the top of the southernmost hill. And that he fell in love with the property, and within a very short amount of time was able to acquire 122 acres and build his retirement home. Or at least that's the legend. Again, some legends we can go with because we don't know any better. This one, I can guarantee you we do know better. It sounds nice, but it's not true. There were actually rumors as early as 1907 that Gillette was going to be buying up land either in Haddam or in Deep River. And actually, he started buying the land for the castle in 1908. So he had been thinking about it for a while. Now, let's get to the good stuff. William Gillette designed the entire house himself. Not that he had a background in that sort of thing, because really he didn't. But he was mechanically inclined enough, and he knew what he wanted in a home. So if you take a look, you can see this is actually a scan of some original blueprints showing the second floor. So you can see some rooms along the left side and on the top, and then the rest of it is just the upper area of the living room. But not only are those blueprints, but Gillette's notes are all over his prints because he was very particular. Detail oriented, that's the phrase we'll use. So he actually hired a friend of his, Robert Porteous, of the Porteous Walker Company of Hartford. They were the general contractors, and then they hired all local laborers to do the work. Now, the construction began in 1914 and was completed in 1919. Now, Gillette later modified the building. So if you look, you can see the bottom right corner. That is a pre 1920, let's say pre 1926 photo of the castle, because you can see that it's a little bit short. But he decided 1923 to 1926 to expand it. He added an in-law apartment suite on the third floor, plus he added 2 tower rooms. So the finished the finished product was that thing right there. So it came in at about 14,000 square feet with a total of 24 rooms. Total cost for the house was $1.1 million, and that was back then. Like I said, he did okay for himself, so he was actually able to afford it. Now, he never actually referred to it as a castle. When people would tell him it was a castle, he would tell them they were wrong. He actually rejected that notion quite strongly. Now, the proper name for it was Seven Sister Estate, after the hill that it was named on. Although unofficially, Gillette referred to it just simply as his had limestone heap, his pile of rocks, or the shack. I wish I had that. That's a pretty good shack. Now, from the outside, it appears to be a medieval castle in ruin, and that was the idea. But on the inside, it's rustic and cozy, with all the conveniences and comforts from home. So from the very beginning, so we're talking 19 teams, the castle was outfitted with all the modern utilities. So we're talking electricity, running water, steam heat, satellite TV, Wi-Fi. Okay, I'm obviously lying about those last two, but he did have everything else. So for example, we have a bunch of light fixtures. So most of the globes are like the one that you see on the top right, that nice little cylinder that was made by the Quoizel company, and they are the ones that are featured most prominently in the house. Bottom row, you see a couple lights made by Tiffany and Company. Yeah, they're okay. And then if you take a look on the top left, you also see another Tiffany light. I'm kidding. It looks terrible. That's actually a Gillette light. So Gillette decided to make some of his own light fixtures just by gluing broken glass from bottles and such together. And so that's what you have on the top left there. I'd like to think of it as his own little knockoff of Tiffany if Louis Tiffany were in preschool. But, you know, whatever. It's his house. He can do what he wants. So as far as the other utilities, oh, hey, look, we have some light switches. It's a panel of light switches that are located in the living room, and you'll see a more zoomed out photo a little bit later. So they're modern brass toggle switches. Gillette actually just put the wood over them. He wanted them to resemble the type of levers you'd see backstage in a theater. Plus, he really loved trains, and we'll get to that later. But he wanted them to look like an operating switch for a railroad. Now, oh, hey, look, it's a bathroom. People are extremely fascinated by this just because what you see there is an original bathroom. So again, we're talking 103 years old here. So it came complete with a sink, toilet, shower, or bath that had both hot and cold water. The other thing, if you take a look right behind where the sink is, you see that black slab there. So it may be a little hard to tell, but that is actually a cast iron radiator. So like I said, there was steam heat. There was a boiler down in the basement that ran off of coal, and it provided steam heat for the entire house. So you can see one of the radiators right over there. We actually still use those. We converted the system, obviously. We use a boiler running off of oil, and we use hot water as opposed to steam. But the radiators that Gillette put in 103 years ago still work. I've actually been up on the third floor during the winter where it gets so ridiculously hot that we have to open windows just to cool it down a little bit. Now, this photo over here gives a really good overview as far as sort of what we've got going on in the castle. So it shows a doorway from the main entrance hall to the living room, plus it shows you part of the second floor balcony. Now, in it, you can see the varying materials that were used for the house. The stone that you see all over there, that's just local field stone. This is Connecticut. We have rocks all over the place. It's not really hard to find this stuff. He just paid local farmers to clear it off their land. They brought it up for him. We don't take it for granted. Get it? Granite. Okay, so in between the stones, you see that the mortar is red, and it's weird, but Gillette did it by design. Now, if you look way through that doorway, you can see there's some dark gray mortar in that entrance hall. That's there for dramatic effect. He wanted you to feel like you were in an old medieval castle. Now, it's cool. but it's creepy. So Gillette had his masons dye the mortar red just to brighten up the house. Just makes it a little bit more comfortable. Plus, it was a very common color throughout the house anyway. Um, Now, the wood that you see is southern white oak. It was brought up from Tennessee and Virginia, and then there were local carpenters doing all of that woodwork by hand. Um, Now, Gillette was smart. He realized it's a really big house. It's really heavy. He doesn't want it collapsing. So he had the entire building framed in steel. So if you take a look, just to the right of that doorway, you see that really big stone column. That's actually a steel I-beam that is covered up by stone. So the house is pretty well put together ish. Don't ask about the roof though. That's a sore subject for us. Now, if you take a look on the walls, you'll see that there's this matting. It's made out of grass. It's a combination of Japanese rice grass and American prairie grass. It's sort of weird because as custom as the house was, that matting was extremely common for the time. He got it out of a department store catalog. The store is Wanamaker's out of New York and Philly. It's supposed to be carpet. That's what normal people used it for, but Gillette thought it would work better on the walls. Now, as far as we know, he just liked the look. It's very rustic. It fits the natural feel of the house. It's comfortable. Plus, I'd like to think he was smart enough. He saw some practical uses: soundproofing, added insulation, it absorbs humidity. Pretty good idea. Now, of course, you have a large house. It's full of wood, full of grass. That makes it flammable. Don't worry, he took care of that. Gillette had his own system installed to put out fires. So there were hoses on each floor of the house. If you take a look, you can see that 1.5-inch fire hose. On the left side over there, that is an original fire hose, the last one from his system. It's hanging up on the wall in the pantry. Now, in the middle, that photo shows something that looks sort of like a tassel or a cattail, big wooden thing hanging down from the ceiling. That is actually a pull cord. Now, in the event of a fire, Gillette would go up there and he'd pull the cord, unless the cord was on fire. Not a great idea to make it out of wood. Just putting that out there, but he didn't ask me. Now, if he had a fire, he'd pull that cord, it opens a valve, and then water would actually come out of a cistern, which you can see a little bit of on the right there. It's a water tank that collected rainwater off the roof. It stored several thousand gallons. So if he ever did have a fire there, he had a pretty good way to put it out. Lucky for us, the house never caught fire. His system is super cool, but fire marshal says it's not quite up to code. So we put in sprinklers because they work a lot better, and we like that. Makes us feel better about things. By the way, sounds really impressive that he had this system. Don't get too impressed. It was very commonly used at the time. They used it in a lot of larger buildings. Gillette saw it used in the theaters. It's where he stole the idea, although I'll give him props for putting it in a house. Get it? Theater props. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is just sort of take you through some of the specific fun features. So these are the types of things that generally when people come to visit the castle and then they leave and then they forget about 90% of the information we gave them. And then someone asks them, oh, what do you remember about the castle? These are the types of things they'll generally come up with. So first of all, we've got doors. Lots of them. 47 hand-carved doors, all with their own unique designs and mechanisms, sort of like a Rube Goldberg kind of thing. And Gillette designed them all himself. Now, you take a look over here. This first photo is the first of 3 pocket doors in the house. It actually shows you that same doorway I showed you a few minutes ago from the entrance hall into the living room, except here the pocket door is actually visible. Now, we like to call it the owl door. So if you take a look at the top, that mechanism, you can see the eyes of the owl. You can sort of see the wings. And it actually still operates. It's really heavy, but it does still work. What a hoot. Okay, I hope I got a chuckle from someone out there in Zoom land. Okay, so as far as what else we've got here. Oh, hey, look, it's another pocket door. This one, although has a different theme, this one is a train door. So Gillette, again, really loved trains. And if you take a look, you can see that there are 2 mechanisms in the centers of each side of the door. And if you look, they are 2 trains, each facing outward, facing away from the center. So if you look really closely, maybe you squint a little bit, you can see the wheels, you can see the smokestack, all that. Now, of course, if you're going to have a train, you also need train tracks. And that door actually is in the same room as the train door. So you can see the train tracks there on the top part of the mechanism. Now, see what else we got here. That first door, the one on the left, is actually the front door. It's a nice, beautiful double latch front door. I love demoing it for people. So the one on the right is actually up on the third floor. It's a beautiful lattice pattern. Again, none of these had any actual rhyme or reason. They're just doors. But Gillette liked it, and it was his house, and it was his money, so he did what he wanted with it. Fun thing about that door on the right is actually out of the 47 doors, the only door that is spring loaded and the only door that has a doorknob. The rest of them have handles. Okay, this one looks a little weird. So this door, I hope you notice there's a little something missing there. And that's for a good reason. There's a really practical explanation here, that being that Gillette messed up. Now, the doors were built off-site. They were brought in towards the end of construction, and he didn't realize there was a problem until it was a little too late. So though, if you take a look to the left of the door, the couch there, a little too big. He couldn't open up the door all the way. It was going to hit the couch. Now, personally, I don't really like the couches. I would have just taken them out and been done with them. But as I mentioned, I wasn't around. He didn't ask me for my opinion. Now, he couldn't have moved the door over to the right because just on the right side of that door is actually a steel I-beam. A little hard to get around that. So what did he do? He just cut out the piece, fits it very nicely around the door, or excuse me, around the couch. So he opens it up. He gets a nice quick fix. Now you close it. Obviously, you have a big hole in the door. So he saved the piece. He had it situated in a little area in the corner of the room, so he could always just slide it out and then pop it back in. It was fitted with dowels, sort of like a leaf to a dining room table. Same general concept. And then let's look at, wait, more doors. This is actually Gillette's study, his office. Now, we have a few doors here, so I've got to give you the breakdown on them. The one on the far right, that really tall door, we refer to it as a secret passage door. Now, it's not actually a secret. People can see both sides of it, and actually there's a sign, so, you know, not much of a secret. It's actually not even a passage. It's just one door. But what it is, it's essentially a shortcut. So Gillette could use that door if he wanted to go between his study and his main entrance hall. He could use it to sneak up on people, surprise them when they're coming upstairs. Or if they were already upstairs, he didn't want to deal with them, he could use it just as easily to sneak back down into the basement. Or if he's home alone feeling lazy, it's a really nice shortcut into the basement. So a lot of good characteristics there. The really short door in the center, that's where Gillette's safe was. He had a regular metal office safe. It was just behind the door. And then that magical, amazing, spectacular door on the left, that is a closet. It's a house, need a place for your stuff. So another thing that people always like to talk about are the mirrors. So I will explain. Above each of the 3 French doors in Gillette's living room, there are mirrors. Now, they look very much like windows, as you can see, but they are, in fact, mirrors. You can see the reflection in there, and that was by design. And it's there for a very good reason. Sort of Gillette's security system. Now, not that he was worried about that kind of thing, because he wasn't. When I say security, what I really mean is it's a low-tech surveillance system. Gillette wanted to spy on his friends when they came to visit because, you know, it's fun. So standing outside of his bedroom on the balcony, looking straight across the room at one mirror, he'd have an angle on his main entrance hall so he could see who's coming in to visit, decide if he wanted to hang out. So we like to refer to it sort of like his caller ID. And then there was one that didn't actually show him anything, it just bounced the room out. And then the one that you see over here actually showed him the bar. It's Gillette's world famous trick bar, and we'll get back to that in a moment. So Gillette was pretty mechanically inclined. Oh, hey, look, close up view. You can see the bar more. He was mechanically inclined, and he had a wicked sense of humor, and that's an awesome combination because when he designed the bar, he put in 2 hidden locks. He could lock it up without his friends knowing, then let them try to get in. So let's see if we can do that. Wait, okay. Oh, hey, look, open and closed. Okay, bear with me for a second. I'm going to try to do a quick, let's see if the YouTube video is going to run, and if not, oh yeah, it does. Awesome, good for us. Okay, so this is where I have to, give me a second. Let's see if I can get this going to where I want it and do it. Actually, that's a really good place to start. So let's, who's that handsome rascal? Right behind this door. Now, it's a wooden block, pretty basic. Now, the block itself is being held by a pin. Now, if I were to lift this pin out, it releases the block. This is spring loaded. When it's released, it goes into the pocket on the side of the door that locks the top part. Now, let's take a look underneath. And right in the middle of the cabinet, you see that block right there. Now, what's going to happen is as I bring this door up, that block is going to come down. So, as a block comes down, goes into a notch on the door. That locks the bottom. So William Gillette would close everything up. Take out that pin, put it in his pocket for safekeeping. Everything's locked up. So he would excuse himself to go upstairs to get ready for dinner, and then would invite his friends to relax down here for a drink while they wait for him. He'd go upstairs, stand outside his bedroom, take a look through that mirror above the door in the back corner of the living room, and then from there he had a Okay, so I understand there was a little bit of volume issues over there. So what we're gonna do is, well, I'll tell you where you can find that video, YouTube. But I'll explain a little bit more in a second. And hopefully the other video I have will be going. But hopefully you could at least see the bar moving a little bit. Let's move on. Oh, yeah. So another thing people always will say that they remember about the castle, doesn't matter how old they are, they will always say something about cats. And sometimes people will come up to me and they'll say, well, what was the deal with the cats? So the short answer, William Gillette just really loved cats a lot. Now, some people might say he loved them too much. I mean, that's all based on opinion. I would agree with them, but you know. So as far as the cat situation, he had roughly 15 to 20 pet cats living with him at any given time. Gillette treated them quite well. They actually wore bells around their necks. They ate meals with him. He even threw them birthday parties. In fact, let's see some more cat stuff. So actually, you could see a picture on the left there. That's William Gillette with Sir Henry, one of his cats up on his shoulder. And then there's just another picture of a cat, Joseph, and you can see actually that's Gillette's handwriting underneath and on the side of the photo. He liked writing on the sides, makes it really annoying. So he just really loved cats, probably for their personalities, their independence, things of that nature. Story is that, you know, he would go to a new theater whenever he was doing a production, and before he'd seek out the manager, he'd seek out the house cat, because there's always going to be cats. They're very, very, very useful. So as far as the extent to which he took his cat seriously, he had a cat named Angelina, who was actually his feline companion on the houseboat, the Aunt Polly. And he actually once put out an ad looking for mice in the local newspaper for Angelina. I actually came across another newspaper article where Angelina was requiring, or had just somehow entered into the Red Cross. She had gotten official membership to the Red Cross. Don't ask me how a cat does that, but he probably pulled some strings. Although evidently William Gillette even had his limits, because he had a couple strays that he was trying to find homes for, and evidently his wasn't the right one. And he actually put out an ad in the local paper, and it said, 2 perfectly black Tommy kittens to be given away. Anyone wanting one or both of these delightful felines must write stating qualifications. That is, we want to be sure that they do not go to stupid boobs who do not know what a cat is. Would like to have recommendation from last cats that you have lived with, but that is probably asking too much. Yeah, he really loved cats. That's the bottom line. So if you like cats, come and visit us. You'll be happy. Okay, so I'm gonna just take you room by room here and show you just some of the highlights. I'm giving you the tour here, so enjoy it as best as I can. Okay, that's the main entrance hall. So again, it's dark and creepy like an old castle, but it's dramatic effect. The rest of the house is really bright, really cozy. Now the door on the left went to a standard basement area, storage, mechanical space, stuff like that. And then The door on the right side is a guest bathroom. Um, so again, pretty modern for the time, but also pretty handy. And then in between, there's a little capstone. Now it's hard to read because it's not zoomed in, but it says of Portis Walker Company of Hartford Builders, 1919. Again, they were the general contractors. 1919 is when they finished. And then just around the corner from there, we have that area. I like to tell kids it's the dungeon, but in reality, it's the coat room. So that shelf is just, you see that flat rock that's straight ahead. That's shelf for people to put their bags and other belongings. And then if you look really closely, you might be able to see some pointy rocks sticking out on the left wall. Those would be the coat hooks. Okay, big show. The living room. Woo! This is 1,500 square feet with a 19-foot ceiling, so it is by far the largest room in the house. Now, with a room that size, you can't really call it the living room, so Gillette referred to it often as the Great Hall or the Great Room. Now, the focal point of that would actually be the fireplace. So you have this beautiful fireplace about 6 feet long. Didn't need it. He already had the central heating, but he had that and 2 other fireplaces in the house. Now, if you take a look along the side of the fireplace, we've got a bunch of figurines there. Gillette was sort of a conundrum. He was someone who could literally afford anything he wanted in life. And I mean, he did take advantage of that to a certain extent, but also what he really wanted were tacky tchotchkes. So if you take a look on the right, you see we've got those figurines over there. He did love frogs a lot, not as much as cats. He had 15 pet cats, but he only had 2 pet bullfrogs. Mike and Lena were their names. They lived in his greenhouse pond. And then if you take a look on the left, we've got those funny looking clay figurines. Those would be incense burners. They came up from Gillette's father, who took a trip down towards Central or South America. Now, we don't know for sure. They could very easily be pre-Columbian, which would obviously make them by far the oldest pieces in the house, or they could just be something his dad picked up at a souvenir shop at a tourist trap. Who knows? Either way, they're still at least 140-ish years old, so that's still pretty cool. Now, Gillette, of course, has a logistical issue here. Big problem. He loved having his figurines around the fireplace, which is fine, except the dude had 15 cats. Cats jump up on stuff like rocks and ledges, so, you can see where I'm going with this. Now, if you were to look closely at a couple of those frogs on the top 2 ledges, or on any of those with any of those incense burners, he actually cemented them down to the stone. So not only are they original, most of them have moved since he put them up. Keep in mind, he moved in 103 years ago. That's not too bad. Now, in front of the fireplace, we have that beautiful wooden card table, very decorative, very ornate. We actually refer to it very affectionately as the cat table. He designed it, or at least we think he designed it, so his cats would have a toy to play with. All those tassels you see hanging down are hanging from strings, so again, something to bat at. Yeah, it's a very cat-friendly environment, or as I like to say, it is Gillette's Castle. Get it? Castle. It's a perfect pun. Okay, I'll stop kidding around now. Okay, moving on, we have the dining room. Looks really small, but actually that was the idea. People imagine Gillette being this grand dramatic actor, of his time period, all this money, and he's living in a castle, so he must have great parties like the Great Gatsby. No. He was a fairly private person, so he never had more than a few people visiting him at a time. So the table is all he had for a dining room table. The booth that's against the wall was all he had for seating. If you take a look, you'll see that his table's set up on tracks. He can move it in and out on a glide. That way he didn't scratch up the floors. Really, really, really convenient. So essentially there's a pull cord underneath the table. Pull that down and lifts up the crossbars, allows you to bring the table out. Now, Gillette would obviously be sitting on the center of the booth, and then whatever friend, family member, pet cats were joining him for the meal, they'd sit on either side of him, and then you just pull the table back in, and you don't have to worry about food falling on the floor. Awesome. Now, let's see. So I already showed you the lounge. I had the bar, which we tried to play again. I'll get back to that a little bit later. But also it had had those 2 really cool pocket doors with the train symbols on it, and it also had that door with the cutout. This is the one other big feature we point out in the lounge. It's a daybed. It's really long, but I'm pretty sure that was by design because unlike myself, Gillette needed it. He was 6'3". So I find that to be a really good place for someone that size to be able to stretch out, take a nap. Um, Now, underneath the daybed, there's some wooden posts, and it's a little hard to see, but there's actually chicken wire behind it. The reason is because there's actually a radiator underneath the daybed. So heat comes out of the radiator, it goes through vents against wall, warms up the room. Plus, as an added bonus, it's a heated daybed. But of course, he had the cats. He didn't want them to sneak through, burn themselves on those hot pipes. But yeah, it's pretty comfortable. I've been really tempted to nap there, but that's sort of frowned upon. It's a good place for a cat nap. Okay. Next up, we have Gillette's office or study. All the furniture in there is original. Actually predates the castle. This stuff came from Gillette's family house in Hartford. So if you take a look, you see the chair going right by the desk. There's a file cabinet in the back left, and if you really look in the back right, you can see a little bit of the recliner, all out of his family house in Hartford. Now, much like with the dining room table, if you take a look at his office chair, it sets it up on tracks. That way he can move it in and out on a glide, on wheels, not scratching up the floor. Super practical. Okay, let's look at some bedrooms. Now, this one is called the blue bedroom. It's just a regular guest bedroom, but you can see the bed frames, the linens, furnishings, all original. And then actually, if you take a look, you can't really see it, but just off to the left of that picture is actually the picture of the bathroom I showed you the photo of earlier. That's Gillette's room. It's sort of weird because it's one of the smallest rooms in the house. So you would think the master bedroom would be a little bit, I don't know, more masterful. But Gillette didn't really need the space. He was used to spending time in hotel rooms and small apartments when he was traveling. When he wasn't traveling, he was living on a houseboat, which although it was 144 feet long, still, smaller quarters. So he was used to it being small. And then the cool thing is, if you take a look at the top left part of the picture, probably the coolest thing in the bedroom there, you can see a weird wooden lever. That is actually just an extension for the light switch. Gillette was lazy, so what he did is he just had an extension built, so he didn't actually have to get out of bed to turn off the light. And don't worry, there was plenty of storage. There is a walk-in closet that's around the corner from that. Oh, hey, look, the art gallery. So originally, this room was actually an art gallery. People are really surprised by that, but that's actually what it was. Now, of course, the term art gallery is way too fancy. Gillette didn't like that, so he called it the picture room. Big room, lots of pictures. It makes sense. He had upwards of 100+ paintings in his collection at one point. He didn't really want to show off the paintings, though. This was more of his own private space to hang out and enjoy his own collection. So he didn't really invite a lot of people up there, but, joke's on him. Castle's open to the public, so too bad. Now, you can tell what he liked. It's all natural scenes. There's a lot of seascapes, landscapes, very different designs and styles. So none of the artists are really household names. There are a few that are featured in major museums. Most of them are just random pieces. He liked collecting based on based on his personal taste rather than popular trends. There we have a library. Yeah, he had a lot of reading interests. He had a lot of time on his hands. I don't think Gillette slept much. Probably just stayed up most nights drinking coffee and reading and thinking about what other stuff he did. Now, his total book collection was about 1,182 books. Again, a lot of time on his hands. And he did read everything. He read a lot of fiction. He knew a lot of the authors. He also read nonfiction. So subjects covering philosophy, history, religion, science. What you can see just in this photo alone covers probably about a quarter of his book collection. Now, since he was a child, William Gillette loved trains. If the video later doesn't work, then I'll quote him. Ever since he was an infant, or for all he knows before, he knew he wanted to drive a locomotive. People didn't tell him he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, but he often heard that he was born with a steam engine in his mouth. Again, you get the idea. He loved trains because trains are cool. So in 1927, he spent 50 grand to build a railroad on his property because, that's what you do when you have love trains that much and you have the money and the land. He had about 3 miles of track. It went all over the property. He built an engine house. He had 2 train stations, several bridges, and a tunnel. 2 engines, one was steam, one was electric, and several passenger cars. You take a look in the top left, that is the electric engine. And that is a photo of Gillette at Grand Central Station. That was a terminus for his little railroad. Um, and then you can also see some photos. The other three photos are of the steam engine. Um, Grand Central still stands. No train tracks. We got rid of those years ago, but there are picnic tables, so feel free to enjoy a nice little lunch there. Um, okay, let's talk about some people that Gillette knew. He knew a lot of people. We'll get to the ones you may have heard of. Okay, top row. Some of you may recognize that lady. Some of you may not. That is Helen Hayes. So she and her mother actually stayed in the castle, that blue bedroom I showed you. And Gillette actually helped her significantly towards the start of her career in the theater. He was a mentor to her. So that's pretty good considering how she became the first lady of the American theater. You take a look, bottom center, that wacky guy over there, that's Albert Einstein. So back in the 1930s, Einstein had a summer home in Old Lyme, and we know at least one occasion where Gillette hosted him at the castle. We have a running joke that Einstein used to have normal hair, and then he took a ride on the train through the tunnel, and then poof. I'd also like to sort of think that Gillette probably played the bar trick on Einstein, because I mean, why wouldn't you think that? Like the guy understood more about the universe than most people, but he still wouldn't have been able to figure it out. But I know how the bar works, Al. So take that. And then you take a look, we see who else we have. The gentleman in the bottom left corner, that is none other than President Calvin Coolidge. He and his wife were friends with Gillette's, said that they really did enjoy the train ride, so good for them. And then if you look in the bottom right corner, that guy actually owes part of his career to William Gillette, because the first one of his first roles was on stage in Sherlock Holmes. He was cast as Billy the Page Boy. So that is none other than Charlie Chaplin. Now, I'm going to move on here. Let's talk about that guy. I can't really talk about William Gillette's life or the castle property itself without talking about that gentleman. That is Yukitaka Osaki. Now, Osaki was from a really prominent family within the Japanese government. Now, he and his brother Yukio came to the US to study. His brother actually didn't like the weather here, moved back to Japan. Yukio Osaki, once he went back to Japan, continued with his political career, eventually became the mayor of Tokyo. And in 1912, he was the one who donated the cherry trees to Washington, D.C. And actually, more than that, he was instrumental with the Japanese Constitution and is considered to be the father of constitutional governing in Japan. So he was very well regarded. Now, his brother Yukitaka, on the other hand, stays in the US. He ended up bouncing around a little bit. He was involved with the theater scene. Somewhere along the way, he gets hired as a crew member on Gillette's houseboat, eventually becoming his valet, his assistant, traveling with him as he's working in the theater. Now, by the time Gillette had moved into the castle, he'd already known Osaki for about 20 years. Let's see if I can move to the next slide. So he had already known Osaki for about 20 years. So Osaki stayed on at first as a member of the castle staff. Gillette actually built Osaki a little cottage right down by the river. There, no, not that one. There we go. Okay, that's the one. So he built him a cottage down by the river where he would stay. Even after he retired, he still stayed there, and he still was considered sort of a very highly respected member of the castle and of the community. He had his own land down there for his garden. He had a bunch of livestock. The house was actually called the House of the Three Brothers, the three brothers being Osaki, his donkey, and his mule. By the way, that was Osaki's own name for the house. His donkey and mule stayed on the bottom floor. And then more than an employee, he was Gillette's friend. He was his companion. Now, the castle was meant as Gillette's retirement home. He was 65 years old when he moved in 1919, but he didn't stop there. He kept on going for quite a while. His last international tour of Sherlock Holmes ended in 1932, so he would have been 79 at that point. His last stage performance was in 1936, so he would have been about 83-ish. The show was Three Wise Fools. So it was performed at the Bushnell in Hartford. Now, he maintained pretty good health. I mean, Gillette had some issues over the course of his life, but he was pretty with it for a while. And then in late 1936, came down with pneumonia, went to Hartford Hospital to recover. He went home early 1937, stayed at the castle for another few months, and then he got sick again, went up to Hartford Hospital. Kids always ask, did he die in the castle? No, he didn't. He died at Hartford Hospital. And that would have been on April 29th, 1937, at the age of 83 and 3/4. Gotta do the 3/4 because that's a big deal. You can see his grave right there at Riverside Cemetery in Farmington. He was buried in the family plot along with his parents, his wife, and 4 of his siblings. Edward, his brother, was the black sheep. He stayed out in Iowa. And actually, if you go visit that now, the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park actually just recently did a really nice cleanup job. So that does not look like that anymore. It is a very nice, fresh, white stone. Now, when Gillette died, his cousin Joseph Hooker was named the executor of his estate, along with the First National Bank of Hartford. Gillette's wife's half brother, Hal Cohen, had been living in the castle while Gillette was around and was allowed to stay there after his death. Now, papers, books, furnishings, things like that were split between Gillette's 2 surviving nieces. He left money to 7 people, friends, family members, former employees. The values of ranged anywhere from $200 to $5,000, depending on the person. And then any money that was left over afterwards was split equally between the 2 nieces and the brother-in-law. Now, one thing we've been digging into a lot recently is what happened with Osaki. When Gillette died in 1937, Osaki was still around, still living in that house. In his will, Gillette gave Osaki full lifetime use of that cottage and the riverfront property, and Osaki stayed there. Now, when World War II broke out, Osaki was shocked by the destruction caused by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. Now, some neighbors were concerned. There was a local minister named Alan Gates who wrote letters to the editor of the Hartford Courant about Osaki's so-called plight. They sent a reporter to interview Osaki, but another neighbor, Alice Hamilton, came to intercept the reporter, convince him not to publish a story that would bring any attention to Osaki. Now, one day, an FBI agent visited the area for a routine investigation. He first met with the Hamilton sisters, and then Alice escorted him to Osaki's house and stood outside during the interview. The agent recognized that Osaki was proud of his adopted home country. He was immediately cleared of any suspected threat to the country. Why he was investigated, we don't know. There's a lot of spy scares back then, so it could have been that a neighbor or community member reported him. But also people from Japan at that time were not allowed to be naturalized citizens, so it might have just been a more routine inquiry. But anyway, he was cleared. But he was already starting to fade a little bit before Pearl Harbor. So his health began to fail in 1941, and then he passed away in September 29th, 1942. Gillette's brother-in-law, Hal Cohen, found Osaki in his house, and they actually held a little funeral service right across the street at the Hamilton's house, and he was actually buried in the Cove Cemetery up the road in Hadlime, so not very far away from where his house was. Now, the Gillette family his family couldn't afford the upkeep of the castle. They want to get rid of it like right away. The problem is William Gillette picked a really bad time to die. 1937, a lot of stuff going on in the world. Not exactly an easy time to unload real estate. So the castle actually went to auction in 1938. Now they tried to start the bidding at 150,000. Keep in mind his total cost for the castle initially was 1.1 million, but no one would actually take the $150,000 bid. So they had to keep bringing it down, and then they actually started the bidding at 25,000. Winning bid was 35 grand. It was a real estate broker from New Jersey named Louis Schlesinger. The executors go to shake his hand, take his picture. They say, "Congratulations, you have the winning bid." We reject it. And the reason that is William. Well, that's one section of William Gillette's will. But if you look about halfway down, he says he doesn't want to see the castle. Well, let me give you the good stuff. He says, not in this part, but I'll get to it. He says, "I would consider it more than unfortunate for me should I find myself doomed after death to a continued consciousness of the behavior of mankind on this planet to discover." Then he lists all the stuff he built. The walls of the property, the castle, the railroad, etc., should reveal themselves to me as in the possession of some blithering saphead who has no conception of where he is with what's surrounded. So if you look, you can see that about halfway down the screenshot there. By the way, feel free to use that in your own will. I don't know if it gets by the legal experts these days, but it is wicked fun. He later said if he were conducting the sale himself, he'd exercise discrimination. He'd take a lower price to a more appreciative buyer than for someone who had no capacity whatsoever for mechanical satisfaction. And that's basically what happened. So they figured Schlesinger, this real estate broker, was probably blithering saphead, or he might have represented blithering sapheads who might tear down the castle, develop on the land. So they decided to reject his bid and they held out. Now, if you fast forward to 1943, the state of Connecticut realized the place was still on the market. Now, during the Depression and during World War II, they'd been building up the state park system. Originally, they wanted to buy the land, but not the castle, because, yeah, castles are not easy to maintain. Very costly. But luckily, there's an organization called the Connecticut Forest and Parks Association. It's the oldest nonprofit conservation group in Connecticut. They're still really active. They convinced the state to buy everything. The problem is that back then the state didn't really have much money. They had $20,000 of public funding they could set aside for the castle. And then the CFPA went ahead and raised $10,000 just by collecting donations. So they pulled together 30 grand. They offered it to Gillette's family. That was back in 1943. And then in October of 1944, that's when it first opened as a museum at State Park. And it's been in the mostly capable hands of the state of Connecticut ever since. We let it go for a little while, but really, especially like 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a lot going on, but especially the last couple of decades, we've put a lot into it. Case in point, major restoration was done between 1999 and 2002. Cost was $11.5 million, but it was worth every single penny. And actually, there's capital projects going on all the time. A couple of years ago, we were awarded by the State Bonding Commission $1.99 million for capital improvements. It's a 3-year project. We did the retaining wall in 2020. We did the port cochere, the front entrance area last year. And hopefully any day now, we're going to start resurfacing that terrace. Fingers crossed, folks. For anyone that's curious about whatever happened to the trains, I'll explain, because a lot of people sort of get a little bit confused with this. If you think you rode the train at Gillette's at the castle, for most of you out there, you did not. I say most. There are people out there who did. There's a lovely lady in East Haddam named Anita Ballack, who's in her 90s, and she's still around. Her family owns the local garden center, and I've actually have her. I did an interview where she was talking about her father selling vegetables to Gillette and being invited to go and visit. And she remembers sitting on his lap riding around the train. So she can say she rode on the train when it was still there. However, a few months before a few months before the state bought the property, Gillette's family actually sold the trains. So around 1943, the railroad went to Lake Compounce. So they were there from about 1943 to 1991. So if you were at Lake Compounce riding the train around the lake anytime between, let's say, 43 to, I'd say probably the late 80s. I don't know if they actually ran till 91. Then you rode on Gillette's train, just not at the castle. Now, eventually they were going to upgrade the ride. So they wanted to throw out Gillette's trains. And we said, how about you throw them our way? So they did. So a few of the passenger cars we actually have on display in the castle. We also have both of the engines back. Now, the steam engine is currently stored in an confidential, undisclosed government location. The electric engine, though, is actually on display in our visitor center. In 2007, the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park raised $10,000 to have the engine restored so it could be properly displayed. Fun little tidbit there. The train engine was actually restored at Priest Garage in Chester, or excuse me, Priest Garage. It was built at Priest Garage in Chester in 1927. You fast forward 80 years, that building was the home of Ted Tyne Motorsports, the same company that restored the engine in 2007. So it's pretty cool because it was restored in the same building that was actually built in 80 years prior. Let's get to some other fun tidbits. Let's talk about Gillette getting in trouble. He was a daredevil. Okay, so there's only 2 documented cases of William Gillette getting in trouble with the law, one of which I never talk about. So you guys are the lucky few to know. 1914, he's doing a play in England, and it was a spy play, and of course, 1914, you're talking being in World War I, so there was actual legitimate spy scares all over the place. Everybody was on alert. The see something, say something kind of thing, but 100 years ago. So a hotel maid found a letter in his room that looked extremely suspicious. So she alerted authorities, and Scotland Yard actually had to come and investigate. And then when they realized it was just something for one of Gillette's plays, they're like, oh, okay, let's move on to actual stuff. The other time that Gillette was in trouble, yeah, he liked motorcycles. So you can see a photo of him on his Nara car, and that photo on the right is it wasn't actually his. It was a very close, very close version of what he had. It's an Nara car from around that same time. It is original, although we unfortunately do not have it on display in the castle anymore. 1925. So Gillette would have been 72 years old at that point. He's speeding down Route 154 and had him on his motorcycle. The car in front of him ended up taking a quick turn, crashed into it. Now, Gillette, like I said, he was 72 at the time, knocked off his bike. He was unconscious for a few minutes, but otherwise he was able to escape with minor scrapes and bruises. The guy in the car in front of him came over to check on him when he was still out of it. Gillette came to, he asked what happened. So the guy said, well, there was an accident. And Gillette's response, was I in it? Obvious answer there. Although he may have gotten away with it medically, legally, he had some issues. He was arrested by the Connecticut State Police for charges of reckless driving. Now, he actually did show up to his arraignment. He was quoted as saying, to be reckless is to be thoughtless, and I never thought so quickly in my life. And that seemed to get a little bit chuckle out of the gallery and probably the judge, and seemed enough to get the charges dropped. Now, that's basically me starting to wrap it up here. I hope that you've enjoyed my talk today. Now, if you do want more information, there are a few books out there. Hey, look, there's pictures of them. So that one on the top left, it's amazing. Gillette was this grand dramatic actor. Like I said, he was the Clooney of his time, but he was extremely private. He didn't want you to know about his personal life. If you wanted to get to know him, buy a ticket, see him in a show. So he died in 1937. The first biography was written of Gillette 1970, and that's that book you see on the left, Sherlock Holmes and Much More by Doris Cook. Then the more comprehensive biography was done in 2011 by Henry Zecker, and that is William Gillette, America, Sherlock Holmes. How comprehensive is it? I mean, if you include all the citations and everything, it comes out to about 734 pages. I think it's about 600 plus of actual content. And then in 2017, Eric Offgang wrote that blue book, the Gillette Castle of History. Okay, earlier I explained that Gillette made one film. In 1916, he took his Sherlock Holmes play, The Strange Case of Alice Faulkner, and turned it into a 2-hour silent movie. Gone and lost forever. Actually, I can't really say that anymore because they found it. Back in 2014, they found it at a cinema warehouse in France. It was restored, premiered in France in 2015, made its way across the ocean, and then some because they ended up premiering it at a silent film festival in San Francisco. And then we actually brought it to the park in October of 2015. We did premieres. It was pretty fun. Anyway, if you want to see it, you can. Just look for it. I've been told it's on Turner Classic Movies all the time, but also you can find it online. It was released by Flickr Alley. Even if you go on Amazon, you can find it. Just search for William Gillette, Sherlock Holmes, or Sherlock Holmes 1916. So you can see that photo on the right is just a shot of the case, I guess, for the DVD. So I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation and that you're thinking, wow, the castle's super cool. Sounds like a place I want to go and visit. They say, well, actually, I shouldn't say. So within this Connecticut State Park system, we have 110 parks and 32 forests, countless other wildlife management areas, reserves, boat launches, etc. But wherever you are in the state of Connecticut, there is a state park within a 15-minute drive of you. That being said, I'm in Danbury right now. The castle's an hour and a half away. It's a good drive, though. So if you do want to visit, great thing is it is a park. Now, it's located 67 River Road in East Haddam. If you don't remember it, just put it into your GPS. And that's where you'll find this sign. Actually, not this one because we got a new one. It's nicer. So the park itself, like all the other state parks, open 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's open from 8 a.m. till sunset. However, the castle's only open seasonally. So we were open Memorial Day weekend, and then we closed on Labor Day because of the terrace construction. So we are not opening the castle again until May 27th, the Saturday of Memorial Day weekend of 2023. But that being said, it's still cool just to come and visit anytime, especially right now. I took that photo while I was on the ferry this afternoon on my way to the castle. So you can see you've got the castle and some nice foliage over there. And then that's more foliage. You can see the Seven Sisters and you've got a lot of color down there. I think we're probably at about peak right now. Anyway, yeah, so if you did want to visit the castle, visit the park, you could still walk right up to the castle, walk the trails. Our visitor center's open. It has information, not that you need it because you've been paying attention very astutely for the last however long I've been rambling. And then when the castle does open for the summer season, you can certainly get tickets. We usually recommend you get them online because we do limited timed entry. So you could just go to our website, which easiest thing I could do is say Google Gillette Castle State Park. Go it's the ct.gov site, and then just that's our homepage. It'll have any updated information. Or if you just wanted to reserve tickets, you go to reserveamerica.com, and then they'll probably be open. The ticket sales will probably open up April 1st. That's what we did this year. So hoping the same for next year. If you want to be able to meet everybody's favorite castle residents, you can. If you take a look, these fine, lovely folks in the photo, those are William and Helen Gillette. Actually, they're not. They're Harold and Teddy Niver. But they portray William and Helen Gillette. They're Baker Street irregulars, so they're part of an elite literary society of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts. They also created their own little break off of that here in Connecticut. They've been associated with the castle for decades. They are some of the greatest living experts on William Gillette and have been, like I said, they've been associated with the castle probably since the 70s. They generally hang out at the castle on Sunday afternoons, talking to people, engaging with them, educating them. They like to say they educate and entertain. They make appearances, not so much recently, but pre-pandemic, they were doing appearances at the Big E, at the Essex Steam Train. They actually do presentations just like the one I'm doing now, except it's a lot more entertaining, and they were in costumes. They call it an evening with the Gillettes. Unless, of course, it's in the afternoon, at which point it's an afternoon with the Gillettes. But yep. So if you do want to find out more about them, SherlockHolmesCT.com. That's their website. Now, if you want to get involved, I've mentioned the Friends of Gillette Castle State. Oh, not ready for that yet. Friends of Gillette Castle State Park a couple times. They do a lot of different projects around the castle. They're an all volunteer nonprofit that supports the park. They do extra improvements, programming, things of that nature. If you want more information on them, they keep a pretty updated website, GilletteCastleFriends.org. Now, we tried to get that video working with the bar demo. That's okay. You can still check it out. Now, I am by no means above shameless self-promotion. So if you really want to catch that video of the bar, you can. It's on YouTube. In fact, there's a lot on YouTube. I got really bored during the pandemic. So I put together a video series, basically a virtual tour of the castle. There's about 30 plus different videos within the series showing you all the different spaces inside the castle, outside of the castle. There's certain areas that the public doesn't get to see, fun little stories, tidbits, stuff like that. Shout out to Kelly Hunt, who was my videographer for the very long pandemic videos series. And if you do want to check those out, you can. They are on YouTube. They are on the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park YouTube channel, so you can just find them. That's where I tried to get that video where the audio was a little iffy. Now, I'm going to see if this works. So I actually have another video here, which is super cool because, as I mentioned earlier, Gillette only did one film in his career, and it's a silent movie. Now, that being said, in 1927, Fox Movie Tones did a news story on Gillette basically saying, oh, here's this old rich famous guy who built a railroad. Let's check it out. So we're talking the early days of the talkies where, you know, there actually was sound in motion picture. So I'm going to see if this works. If it doesn't, I mean, you can actually find this on YouTube as well. Just search William Gillette Railroad. It's on the Deep Video YouTube channel. But I'm just going to see if the volume actually works on this. It's really cool because you can actually hear Gillette. You get a sense of his mannerisms, sense of humor, stuff like that. Let's see when he comes up to it. By the way, he wasn't 72. He lied. Like I said, you can find all of this on YouTube. It's the magic of the internet. That video has actually been on there probably for at least 10 years now. Not enough views, so let's make it happen more. Also, by the way, not enough views to my YouTube series. You gotta keep on clicking on it and keep watching those videos because maybe eventually I'll become a YouTube celebrity because evidently that's what people do now. And then YouTube will pay me money. Okay, so that's basically what I've got for you. When I was doing a dry run, I clocked myself at slightly under an hour, but as my wife likes to say, I make a short story long, and I realize we're at about an hour and a half now. So thank you all for tuning in and for staying with me, hopefully. So that being said, I'm going to open it up to questions. So anybody, if you have questions, I have an answer. And if I don't have an answer, I'll make one up. Again, you won't know the difference. And by the way, if you don't want to ask a question, if you're too shy, whatever, or you decide you have a question later, you can see I posted my email address on that slide. So you can certainly send me an email as well. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, so, where in Long Island was the end poly docked? Did you say
Greenport?
Oh, Greenport.
Is someone going to read the questions from chat?
Yes, yes. Don't worry. Catherine's in the back, so we're good. Yeah. Okay, so question was, what inspiration did Gillette use to design the castle? So Gillette did a lot of traveling worldwide, but also especially through Europe. So we're pretty sure, I've seen pictures in his scrapbooks of castles that look not exactly like his, but pretty close. So he did a lot of traveling through Europe. He saw the old Norman castles on the Rhine. So that's the general area where we think he got inspired as far as the exterior. The interior was basically just whatever he wanted. He had a lot of ideas floating around in his head, and it's whatever he wanted in a home. It's his man cave, his 14,000 square foot man cave. So the question was a few years ago, the front was being repaired. So and what was going on. So like I said, the bonding commission gave us almost $2 million to do capital projects at the castle itself. So in 2020, let's see. So actually, no, it would have started like, the construction would have started like fall of 19 and gone into the spring of 2020. They completely tore down the retaining wall along the outside of the castle and rebuilt it. So yeah, that was probably about $750,000 right there. So if you were there a few years ago and there was an enormous amount of construction on the front part of the castle, that's what you would have seen. And actually, if you do go to that YouTube channel, the Friends of Gillette Castle State Park YouTube channel, I did a video about the retaining wall construction because it was pretty cool. We had the foreman of the crew there talking about it, some photos of construction, stuff like that. It was really cool. And the finished product is amazing. Okay, so someone wants to know about trapdoors and secret compartments. Okay, this is where I get to be the buzzkill. So, everyone assumes because it's a castle that it's going to be, this mysterious place. And I mean, I have been to places that have that kind of stuff. Not really. So I explained the secret passage door and how, I mean, we call it as the secret passage door, just probably more as a marketing thing than anything else. It was, like I said, it was essentially a shortcut door. Now, we do have something we refer to as a secret room. If you watch, again, this is me referring, this easiest thing to do is refer to the videos. If you go and you check out that video series, there's a video on the tower rooms. The second tower room we call the secret room. It was fashioned off of the attic in Gillette's house in Hartford. Now, what we call it the secret room. He didn't, but we did. We do. But it's a little bit weird because it's not the easiest space to access. There's a staircase that is sort of locked into place, so you have to unlock a lever. You push the lever down, it opens the staircase. The staircase is hooked up to a counterweight. The stairs slowly start to come down, and as they come down, they open a hatch up into the room. So it was access to the roof. Also, when kids would visit the castle, they have doll houses and other stuff set up there to play. But like I said, we call it the secret room, but that's not what he would have referred to it as, and that's really about it. Otherwise, it's, as it may sound weird, but it's just a regular house. That's all it is. Oh, is Penn Gillette of Penn and Teller a relative? That is a good question. I actually do not know the answer. That'd be super cool because I am a fan of his. My guess is no. The reason being that he spells his name differently. So he spells his name Gillette with a J, not Gillette with a G. However, the other thing I will say is that he could be a very, 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 very distant relative. What I mean by that is that the Gillette family came over here from England in the early to mid 17th century, settled in New England, and then sort of spread all over the place. So I wouldn't be surprised if he branched off from that same Gillette family, but as far as any kind of direct relation to William, probably not. And especially with the Gillette family from England, as far as I know, when they came over, so William Gillette spelled his name Gillettete. But when the family came over, they did not have the last T or the last E at the end of their names. So, and that name evolved significantly. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe someone eventually just changed it to a J. That, and also I know that he was, Penn Gillette is from Massachusetts. So, I mean, that's New England. So it's possible, but I don't know for sure. But if he is, it's a very, very distant relation. So as far as I know, he didn't win any. The question was, did he win any awards for his acting? As far as I know, he did not. The only thing I do know of is that his play Esmeralda was an award-winning play, but that was one that he had written. He did not star in it though. Okay, so the railroad tracks, why were the railroad tracks torn down? So as I mentioned, a few months before the state bought the property from Gillette's family, they sold the railroad to Lake Compound. So Gillette's family sold it directly to the family that was running Lake Compounds at the time. Now, so when the state got it, the train was already gone. They figured, I mean, there was already walking trails built in. Gillette loved them, so he did a lot of hiking on his own property, but they just tore up the tracks to make more walking trails when they built the park. Now, there's one stretch of track that's left on the walkway going up towards the castle. It's empty now. If you came to visit probably in the 70s or 80s, there would have been a train engine that was on display there. Might have even moved around a little bit. Now, that wasn't Gillette's train. That was just a display piece, but like I said, it wasn't actually his train. There was talk. I mean, there's always people asking about wanting to bring the railroad back. Again, short answers, long. There, back in around 1979, there was a big push to get the railroads back, but the state basically said no way. It's too much of a liability issue. Logistically, it's tough. It takes a lot of money to do it, to get the tracks up and running, to make sure it meets all the current safety codes, things like that, to get people to operate it. Also, the engines are not in good working order. The steam engine, I honestly have never seen, so I don't know if it's. I'm assuming it's what you would expect the steam engine to be like. That's almost 100 years old and hasn't operated in 30 years. But also the electric engine, when it was restored in '07, it was only the outside. It was specifically meant as a display piece. So there's nothing mechanically there on the inside anymore. So the tracks were just taken up just because of the fact that they weren't going to be using the railroad there. And as a state park, it's better to use it for walking trails. I mean, the state had 122 acres initially to play with when it came to designing the park, and they've built it up. Well, they didn't build it, but they've added on another 80 or so acres. So a lot of places to wander, to walk around and enjoy nature. And that's sort of what it's meant for. Who took care of the repair for the train tracks during its heyday? That's a good question. I wouldn't be surprised if Gillette probably just had, well, it depends on what kind of the repairs, what kind of repairs he had. There was his repairman was a guy by the name of Frank Preston, but that was more for household stuff. I doubt he was really maintaining the tracks. It could have been, as far as I know, the folks from Priest Garage were only there to manufacture the engines, and that was about it. So I actually do not know how the tracks were maintained over the course of the. Well, I mean, he used them for a decade, so yeah, I imagine he had someone to make sure that they were in good working order, and I'm sure people probably tried to, because property like his and the type of person he was, you can guarantee there were probably people trespassing and that might have tried to sabotage tracks, stuff like that. I'm sure he probably had someone to check everything, but I don't know who that was. It wasn't me. Okay, the books. So the last, I'm gonna, ooh, pretty pictures. No, there we go. Okay, so the first one, Sherlock Holmes and Much More. That one, where you find these books. That one you might be able to find in local libraries. I don't know if you guys have it here in Danbury, but might have it in the state library. I know around us we do have copies of it, or you might be able to find it online. The Zecker book you can definitely find online on Amazon. Same thing with the Off-Gang book. You can find just because they're more recent, so you can find those online for sure. When the castle's open, we also have a gift shop that sells those books too. So that's, I mean, it's you search for them, you'll be able to find them, especially the last two. The cookbook you might have to look a little bit for, but I would say use your local library system. What happened to the cats? Who the heck knows? They're not there anymore, that's for sure. We have to catch our own mice. So as far as what happened to the cats, your guess is as good as mine. Now, granted, the castle wasn't completely vacated when Gillette died. His brother-in-law, his late wife's half-brother, Hal Cohen, still would pop in on occasion, but my guess is the cats probably just went to other homes. I'm sure they probably didn't have a hard time finding people that wanted to have one of Gillette's cats. So the question is, was in his lifetime, was he more famous for Secret Service or Sherlock Holmes? That is a really, really good question, whoever it was in Zoomland that asked that. I would say, so he was more successful with Secret Service just based on the number of times that he performed it himself. But you have to look at Sherlock Holmes and say, you know, he may have done it roughly 400 less times than he did Secret Service. But if you look at the legacy of Sherlock Holmes relative to the legacy of Secret Service, I mean, the fact that people can name characters from Sherlock Holmes, but not Secret Service, that's pretty telling. But the other thing is, even in his day, I mean, you're talking about where people knew him as being Sherlock Holmes to the point where people thought that Sherlock Holmes was a real person. And I've met people who still do. So I think his impact on Sherlock Holmes as a cultural phenomenon, his being the portrayal, his face being the face of the character, the one that even if people didn't see him perform, they saw the newspapers and the magazines and all that had Gillette's likeness. And so they associated him with that character. So everybody that came after him, up until recent day, to portray Sherlock Holmes had to fit Gillette's profile. They had to be that tall, slender guy with the chiseled face and the hawk nose, and that had to be Sherlock Holmes because that's what Gillette did and that's what everybody knew. So even though he did Secret Service more, that I would say Sherlock Holmes was definitely something that you can't get past that. Everybody knew him for that. And like I said, his impact on Sherlock Holmes was significant. So, I mean, that was, like I said, if you were anywhere in the Western world, you knew Gillette's name and you probably knew him as Sherlock. So that's sounds like it wraps it up. So thank you for tuning in and staying with me for the last hour and 3/4. Hopefully you've been comfortable and enjoyed it. Like I said, if you do happen to have any questions, you can always whoop, whoop. There we go. You can always email me. My email is pretty easy because it's just my name, paul.schiller@ct.gov. So if you do have questions, feel free to reach out. Like I said, you can always come and visit the park. I hope that you do. So thank you again for tuning in out there in Zoom land. Thank you to the Danbury Library, to the Friends Group, to Catherine for making this happen. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I know I did. It's always fun testing out technology. So have a good night, everybody.